Okay, so we are on to the next section of respiratory system. And this particular lecture is on the topic called mechanics of breathing. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, so mechanics. So mechanics of breathing. So obviously when you think about breathing, you're taking breath in, the lungs expand, and then you breathe out, your lungs contract. So seemingly very simple process, right? So why is it a topic, and why is it a whole question in the assignment if it's so easy? Well, the issue is that when we think about what lungs are made out of, they're made out of primarily alveoli. Wouldn't you agree with that? So you remember we talked about, so we've got millions and millions of alveoli in the lungs. And when we think about all these alveoli, what type of tissue are alveoli made out of? And this is something we just revised a minute ago. So which type of tissue do cells making up alveoli, which type of tissue is that? Okay, so when you were talking about squamous cells, so which type of tissue was it? I think we did write it down last week. Can you look it up, or do you know?
So is it there's no cartilage? Is it the terminal and respiratory?
No, hold on, we're talking about alveoli. So when we had a diagram showing you alveoli and walls of alveoli, which type of tissue did those cells belong to? Can you see it? Epithelial. So they were epithelial. I'm pretty sure I labeled that. So the epithelial squamous. So squamous is like a subtype of epithelial tissue. So alveoli is essentially all contain epithelial tissue. So made of epithelial. That's right. And another structure which we would find within the lungs are bronchioles, right? Now, bronchioles also will have epithelial tissue, but also some of the larger bronchioles, you remember, they contain rings of cartilage. So rings of cartilage, which type of tissue is that? Okay, so let's again recall from last week's lecture. So rings of cartilage, which type of tissue the rings of cartilage belong to? I think one of you answered that already early on. Cartilage, which type of tissue is cartilage? Connective, absolutely right. So it's epithelial, it's some connective tissue. And a tiny bit of smooth muscle, but not a lot, right? Plus a little bit of smooth muscle. But definitely not enough to inflate and deflate all of these alveoli, right? So what you notice here, what I don't have a lot of is muscle. Do you notice that? It's mostly epithelial tissue. Alveoli is just purely epithelial tissue, nothing else. Single cell of the squamous cells, so nothing else. And in bronchioles, there's only a very small amount of muscle. So what that means in turn is that your lungs cannot inflate and deflate by themselves. They just haven't got the ability to contract and, expand by themselves because of this fact that they don't have a lot of muscle. So then the next question is, well, what is causing lungs to expand and contract? Does anybody have a suggestion? So if I haven't got any muscle within the lungs, or not much anyway, so what is making lungs expand and contract? Where are those muscles? Anybody's got any idea about that?
The diaphragm.
Right, so diaphragm is one, right, absolutely right. So one thing we haven't discussed yet is diaphragm. So diaphragm definitely contain muscle. So the muscles which are going to be doing the actual work of inflating and deflating your lungs are diaphragm, but also muscles which you find between your ribs, right? So if you think about yourselves taking big breath in, let's try to do it together, right? Everybody take a big breath in. Can you feel how your rib cage is starting to tighten, right? Can you feel that those muscles, they're doing something, right? And these are the muscles which are causing your lungs to deflate and inflate. So the muscles which are doing the actual job of expanding and contracting your lungs, so muscles which are involved in this process, they are diaphragm. And you notice that I'm not writing full sentences anywhere, I'm taking really brief notes. So your job for the assignment is to expand everything I'm saying and make it into a sentence or make it into a small paragraph, okay? So that's diaphragm, and the other group of muscles which are helping with this process, they're called intercostal muscles. So they're the ones which are found between your ribs. So it's intercostal muscles. Let me just check I spelled it right. I do have, yeah. So I'll put in brackets. So those are muscles which are found between your ribs. Okay, so let's now kind of have a think about it together. So I'm going to have a go at drawing a diagram here. So here is your ribs. I'm just going to draw a few, right? I'm not going to draw the whole set of ribs. So these are going to be ribs, and then I'll draw the diaphragm. Maybe what I'll do is I'll draw them in different colors so they stand out a bit. So let me do it in red, for example. Okay, so they're going to be those muscles between your ribs, here and here. And in red is going to be intercostal muscles. And then finally, underneath that rib cage, you've got your diaphragm. So that's going to be a bit like that. So it's going to be long, sort of stretch of smooth muscle. And this is your diaphragm. So let's now have a think about what's going to happen if those muscles contract. So if those muscles start to contract, what's going to be the end result of this process? Now, when we talk about muscles contracting, what we essentially mean is that that muscle is going to become shorter. Okay, so by contracting, I mean it become shorter. So that takes a little bit of visualization again. So let's think about it. So imagine each of my intercostal muscles will become a little bit shorter. So that's going to get shorter. That next lot of intercostal muscles is going to get shorter. Can you see that what's going to happen as a result is those ribs are going to be positioned closer together? Does that make sense to you, right? So can you try to visualize it? So shortening those muscles, what you're essentially doing is you're going to move those ribs closer together. And as a result, those ribs are going to start moving closer to each other and sort of move outwards and upwards, right? So the end result of this process is going to be ribs kind of positioning closer to each other So all of these ribs start to get lifted because of the intercostal muscles getting shorter. So rib cage lifts. Right, so distances get smaller, so ribs are getting closer to each other, and the whole rib cage, the end result of this process, the whole rib cage lifts. Let's now have a think next about what's going to happen to the diaphragm. So diaphragm, when it's relaxed, it's in this kind of arch, a bit like a rainbow. So my question is, so if this is the length of the diaphragm when it's relaxed, if I shorten it, what kind of shape is that going to give to the diaphragm? How is its shape going to change? So if that's the length of the diaphragm when it's relaxed, if I now shorten my diaphragm, in what direction is it going to move? Is it going to go down, or is it going to go up? Well, if I look, in order for it to go up, let's try it, okay? So if I'm saying it's going to go up, then it's got to be more like that. Can you see that? Right? Because that's going to move it even higher. Let me just try it one more time. So it's a bit more of a marked difference. So I started here. If I'm trying to move it up, it's got to be more like that. Can you see that? Is that longer or shorter than that picture? That's longer. But what I'm actually doing is I'm making it shorter. I'm contracting it. So therefore, in what direction is it going to end up moving? Down. Can you see that? Right? So it's good to have a theory and say, okay, let's try. If it's got to move up, it's got to be longer, and that's not what I'm trying to do. So therefore, if I'm contracting that diaphragm, that it's not going to go up, it's actually going to go down because I'm shortening it. So the distance, that overall distance, is going to become smaller. So what's going to happen to my diaphragm, it's going to become essentially flatter, and therefore it's going to move down. So let me just try to draw it so it's looks a lot flatter, more like that. Okay? So my diaphragm so I was relaxed here, so the rib cage was more kind of down and the diaphragm was more of an arch. And when I contracted all those muscles, the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm, my rib cage lifted because those distances are becoming shorter, so the ribs are closer to each other. And when I'm contracting diaphragm, that in terms becomes shorter, and therefore it's kind of forced into more flatter shape, into flatter position. And overall it moves down. Let's now think in terms of volume inside your chest. Where are you going to have bigger volume inside your chest? When your muscles are relaxed or when your muscles are contracted? So in what position, which picture represents bigger volume inside your chest? Picture 1 or picture 2? What do you reckon? What do you think? So would you have more volume inside your chest here, or more volume inside your chest in this picture here? Well, think about it. So the diaphragm is up, right? And your rib cage is down. On this picture, my diaphragm moved down and the rib cage lifted. Okay? So are you changing your mind? You're sure? So let's think about what's going to happen with my own
You're gonna
body,
have more room.
right? So exactly. So here on this picture, inside my chest, I will end up with more room or more volume. Okay. So room, you can think about it as in technical terms as volume, right? So what you have here is less volume inside your chest, in this kind of area here, behind your ribs and above your diaphragm. And on this picture, inside your chest, you'll have more volume. Well, let's test it, right? Let's take a big breath and think about how the volume inside your chest changes. Okay, so another big breath. So that's the point in time when my intercostal muscles, I can feel them contracting, right? What do you think? Big volume or little volume?
Big volume.
I'd say big
Because they
volume then.
inflated.
Yeah, exactly, right? And then I'm relaxing. My rib cage goes down. At this time, I know you can't see it, but that's the point in time when your diaphragm is relaxed and it goes up. And you can definitely feel there's less room here in your chest. Can you feel it, right? Particularly if you take exaggeratedly big breath and then let it out, okay? So definitely less volume on this picture and more volume on this picture. So what does it mean in turn, right? Well, in turn, it's going to obviously change the volume inside your lungs. So on this picture, you'll have less volume in your lungs, and on this picture, you'll have more volume in your lungs. So more volume, not just in your chest, but also in your lungs. So less volume in terms of your. I'll put it in technical terms. So the inside of your chest is called thoracic cavity. Have you ever heard of it? So it's the top part of yours. So if you remove your lungs and your heart, which you'll be looking at well, if you like, inside human body is called thoracic cavity. Whereas the well where your intestines are, kidneys, etc., reproductive organs, this is called abdominal cavity. So your kind of body is like separated into these big cavities. You will do, let's say, full body dissection, right? So thoracic cavity here, abdominal here. So what I'm talking about when I'm talking volume is I'm talking about volume of this thoracic cavity. So it's thoracic cavity. So it's volume of thoracic cavity. But also in turn, it means less volume here in terms of the volume of your lungs. So less volume of your lungs as well. So that volume also applies to your thoracic cavity, but also it applies to the volume, so more volume. Large volume for lungs. I think it sounds a bit better. So more volume in thoracic cavity, and therefore larger volume of the lungs. So that's where it gets a little bit technical again, right? I will need to wipe some of this information off because I need some space for the next diagram, okay? To make sure, first of all, you copied information you needed to copy before you move on. Okay, am I ready to wipe it off? Is everybody happy with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to draw one of your lungs. This exact same thing is going to be happening with the other lung. So not to make it too bulky, these diagrams, I'm just going to do one lung as a representative of what's happening inside, okay? So let's imagine lung is a bit of a sac, something like that. And inside this sac, you have some molecules of air. Okay, so that air is going to include oxygen. Some of these molecules are going to be carbon dioxide. Some of these molecules are gas called nitrogen. So anyway, you have some molecules of air in your lungs. And I'm going to represent those molecules of air as little black dots. Okay, so let's do that. So I have a quantity of molecules represented by these dots inside my lungs. And I also have quantity of those molecules in the air around me, in the environment. So this is my lung, this is environment. So this is outside my body, this is inside my body, right? So let me draw a few molecules of air outside my body in the environment. And on this picture, let's imagine that those molecules are distributed roughly equally to the molecules inside your lungs. So you're sort of placing them at roughly equal distances, right? So at the moment, let's say we've got equilibrium, everything is equal. Now, I can think about how closely those molecules are positioned to each other in terms of concentrations, right? So think about diffusion, for example, concentrations. But for gases, the word which is more commonly used is not concentration, but pressure. Have you heard about pressure, gas pressure? Right? So you can think about gas pressure, so this is gas, right? The air around us is gas. So we can think about, you know, how closely those molecules are bunched together as pressure. Okay, so this is pressure. Is equal to pressure inside. So that's my starting kind of point. Now, why we call it pressure? You don't have to talk about it, by the way, in your assignment, but just so you have a little bit of a picture in your head. So when you have molecules, let's say in the room here, or in your lungs, what they're doing, they're not just standing still, they're actually moving, okay, and at fairly high speed. And as they're moving, they're bouncing against the walls of whatever vessel that gas is in. So in this room, molecules of air are bouncing against this board, against the walls, against the door, against the windows. And as they're bouncing against, they're exerting a bit of pressure on that wall of the vessel, maybe this room. And that's why we call it pressure. So more molecules are crammed inside an object, the more bounces you're going to get from the molecules, and that will mean higher pressure. And you can measure pressure in various ways in physics, which we're not going to talk about now. Okay? But that's what essentially it means. All right, so let's now think together what's going to happen when I am contracting my intercostal muscles and lifting the rib cage up, and when I'm contracting my diaphragm, it moves down. You remember on my previous diagram I said the volume of a lung is going to get bigger, right? We know it from our own experience, right? From breathing in and out. At this point the volume of my lung is pretty big. So let's draw that. So my next picture is going to be same thing, but the amount of space that the lung is taken, my picture is going to be bigger. So the volume of the lung is going to be bigger. So let me try to do it more like that. Okay? So the volume of that lung increased. So volume. Now let's think about how that's going to change what's happening with my molecules of gas inside the lung and outside the lung. Well, outside the lung, in the environment, that's not going to change. Do you agree? It doesn't matter if I'm breathing or not breathing. The pressure in the room, the pressure in the environment stays relatively same, right, within a short period of time. It can change over days, maybe, the pressure outside will change. But if I talk about me standing here in this room and taking a breath, pressure outside hasn't changed at this point in time. So I'm drawing the same distribution of molecules outside, so roughly the same distances between molecules. That has not changed. So this is outside, exact same as I had before. Let's now think how that's going to change. So let's imagine it has still the same number of molecules inside, but now I'm giving them a lot more room to run around in. So they're going to be spaced a lot more. So same number of molecules roughly, right? I'm not going to count them, but I'm sort of aiming roughly at the same number of black dots. But I've now distributed them over this much bigger volume, right? So this is my outside, this is my inside. So just using a bit of common sense, where do you think you're going to have low pressure on this picture, and where do you think you're going to have high pressure on this picture? You can, as I said, you can think of pressure as if it was concentration. So basically how closely molecules are bunched together.
So below, inside.
Inside the lung. Okay, good one. Low pressure. And then can you see the pressure here? The molecules are more closely bunched together, so this gives me high pressure. So what this picture shows you essentially, the more room you give to those molecules, right, the lower the pressure is going to drop. Because they're not going to bounce against the walls of the alveoli inside the lungs quite as much, because you're giving them more room to, spread themselves. And then in terms of the direction in which those molecules are going to want to travel, you can think about that in the same way as diffusion. So if you have something closely bunched together in one end of a system, and then you have gases, molecules of something more spread around, in what direction would things want to naturally move? From high to low or from low to high?
From high to low.
From high to low, right? Because that's
like the gas
that's exactly
yeah.
so it's very similar in that sense to diffusion. So things want to distribute themselves equally. They don't want to be crowded. If there is a space for them somewhere else to go, they will go there. Okay? And therefore, in what direction is they going to want to move? From top to bottom or from bottom to top?
Top to bottom.
Exactly. So you will end up going from area of high pressure to area of low pressure. So this is just general rule which applies not just to lungs but to any gases in any system, right? So this is just a rule which is described by physics, okay? And I'm going to write it down. So air moves from the area of high pressure to the area of low pressure. So that rule tells me that as I am increasing the volume of my lungs, that's going to draw that air in, because it's wanting to go from area of high pressure to the area of low pressure, from outside of my body to the inside of my lungs. And that's what's going to then inflate my lungs and and make sure that that air fills my lungs in. Okay? So the end result of this is air moving in, and therefore that oxygen has chance to get delivered to your blood system. Okay? Let's now think about the opposite scenario. Okay? So now I'm going to relax my intercostal muscles, my rib cage is going to move down. Think about the picture on the previous board we did. My diaphragm is going to relax and it's going to move up, and so the volume is going to get smaller, so my lungs are going to get squished inside. So let's draw another picture. So this time my lung is really, really flat. So I'm really squeezing it. And let's now again think about what's happening outside and what is happening inside. So first of all, let's start with simple stuff. What is happening outside? Has that changed in any shape or form? Still the same pressure, right? Still in the same room, nothing might change, still the same weather, 2 minutes later, a few seconds later, maybe even a few hours later, right? The pressure tends to take, a few days to change, right? So it's not something which happens just like that. So that my outside pressure is still the same. So my molecules are still distributed